Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming to this first Boston Office 365 user group session of 2022. As you can see on the screen here, there are many different ways to follow us on social medias and the like, so feel free to hit us up on Twitter. We also have a very active Twitter feed that will echo out a lot of Microsoft updates and the like. So if you guys want to try to stay on top of that stuff, our Twitter feed can be very helpful for that. And we have organizers of our group are Dmitry Apratov of Turn Digital. Myself, I'm Mike Dixon. I work for Wellington Street Consulting. And Bill Gunning, who is the technical lead at the Executive Office of Technology Services and Security. It's a government thing, so it's a really long title. So neither of them are with us today, but they're here in spirit. And if you have any complaints, then you can send those to Bill. In our previous session, we did Viva Connections, bringing your intranet to the next level with Susan Hannelly. It was a fantastic presentation. Susan is a powerhouse in this space and always gives wonderful presentations. You can find this one on our YouTube channel. I believe that's posted now, and catch up on that there if you missed out or if you just want to review it, because there was a lot of material that was covered and it was all super useful. So since last time, one of the things we like to do in these meetings is go over updates that have been announced for Office 365 in the past month. We actually didn't have a session in December, so we're going to be covering the last 60 days for this one. Okay, so Microsoft has announced a OneDrive and SharePoint library drop-down menu, adding a drop-down menu that easily switch between multiple document libraries associated with your team. This is for targeted release now and will be standard release by mid-January. What? So targeted release with a standard release just 2 weeks later. I guess they're pretty confident on this one, so they're rolling it out fast. So we're getting an update in our Pages text toolbar, getting a lot more functionality built right into there for formatting. So this will be fantastic for those of you that are using these news pages for newsletters and things like that. I know we've definitely gotten a lot of complaints at the limitations of what's there natively. So being able to do this will be kind of huge. According to this, we should all have it now or very soon if you're on standard release. And they have also announced sharing links that block download are now available for most videos. You'll have to excuse me, guys. I didn't put in these slides, so I'm actually seeing some of these for the first time right now. Okay, so this is basically a new compliance feature. So we can actually send out sharing links so people can view the videos without them being able to download the videos. So they can view it online only. No functionality for saving it or storing it offline. SharePoint syntax is getting some updates. Okay, so we can now save a Word document as a template by creating placeholders. Awesome. So we can use syntax to basically turn Word documents into forms that can then be automatically read and processed. So this is another one of those trends that we're seeing a lot of in Microsoft, is in general kind of taking the ability to assign metadata to documents and kind of automating it. So this is a level of automated reading of documents, which is very cool. Okay, so this is also coming with looks like a central site for storing these templates and a contract management accelerator. Nice. Yeah, contracts and invoices are definitely the largest use cases that I've seen for things like syntax and also even basic things like content types. Typically, one of the first content types that I'm creating for my clients is either contracts or invoices.
Have you heard anything about the pricing for it?
For syntax?
Yeah.
That's already out there. I don't know specifically what that is. Unfortunately, Dimitri is our licensing expert. I'm sure he could rattle that off the top of his head, but I'm not sure. I do know that pricing for syntax has been announced. Syntax. I'm never going to pronounce that product name properly. Oh well. Microsoft Compliance Center is getting some new filters, releasing built-in filters within Activity Explorer. Yeah, so new filters for the Compliance Center. Oh, new layouts. Okay, so Microsoft actually announced this at Ignite, I think year before last, that they were going to be coming out with a bunch of new layouts for Teams. So it sounds like they're actually starting to deliver on that, and we're getting that this month and hopefully completing that rollout by the end of next month. Not sure if that's for targeted release or standard. All right, so I have a question for you guys. The way that this is worded, Microsoft Teams Rooms meeting layout. When they say rooms there, are they talking about rooms as in the Microsoft conference rooms, or is this breakout rooms within Teams? Any guesses?
The answer might be both, because it says hybrid meetings.
Yeah, enhanced hybrid. Okay, that actually leads me to believe that it's Teams Rooms systems then.
Judging by the picture, it's conference room, right?
Yeah. So I'm guessing that you would have to have at least one Teams Rooms device to enable this feature. So that's interesting. Okay, so this is another thing that that Microsoft was talking about at Ignite, is a lot more microphone and machine learning based capabilities for reducing noise from microphones. Apparently, we can now auto detect music, and we'll remove that from any open microphone. That's interesting. And this will begin rolling out in January and should be finished by mid-February. Very cool. And a new view in Microsoft Lists. So Microsoft Lists now has a board view. So, oh, okay. So this looks like kind of a Kanban, or very, very much like the planner sort of view. That's very nice. I don't know if it's in here, but there was also a release for the for a calendar view for Microsoft Lists as well. So you can now do calendar views in modern SharePoint lists.
And they're now added to the list web part, so you can actually add them to a page, which is even better.
Why is this going forward no matter which way I click on it? Skipped a couple of slides.
Has anyone gotten those Kanban views in their tenant yet? I haven't seen it.
The board views?
Yeah, the board views.
I haven't seen them yet, but honestly, I haven't looked. So, but they did say, they said early February. So, oh, okay, beginning this rollout mid-January. So probably just now starting to roll this out. So I have not seen it yet. And my tenant is in first release. So we wanted to give a big thanks to our platinum sponsor, Turn Digital. Turn Digital has been a fantastic sponsor for the Boston Office 365 user group. They help us to keep the lights on, as it were, and keep all of our services up and running, and we really appreciate that. So thank you very much to Turn Digital. I also wanted to mention to those of you that showed up a little bit later, there is an active poll in the chat that's asking about what meetings, what sorts of topics you'd like us to cover over the course of this next year. We're really interested in getting as much feedback as possible on that. So please, if you haven't already voted in that poll, please go in and check that out, and we will review the results at the end of this.
If you're having trouble finding it, at the top of the screen, you'll see a little icon for forms. You can find the poll in there. Just click on that, it'll bring it up.
And today's main event, how to quickly and effectively style with PowerApps, presented by me. I get the wonderful honor of introducing myself. Did it again. All right. So my name is Mike Dixon. We already covered that. I work for Wellington Street Consulting. Wellington Street Consulting has been a leader in the Office 365 space for the past 15 years. We have migrated over 51,000 seats. Actually, that stat's old. We've done over 60,000 seats now to Office 365. And for some reason, my slides are advancing all by themselves. We've worked with multiple Fortune 500 clients down to small business and entrepreneurs. Wellington Street specializes in digital culture, process automation, and why is this advancing on its own? And cloud education. So quick agenda for today. We're going to go over some of the basic commands for styling. There's actually very few commands that we're going to be talking about. We're going to touch on components today, just a little bit, and I'm really interested in whether or not you guys have ever worked with components. So I actually have some polls that I'd like to get you guys, some feedback from you guys. So we do have multiple polls here. So I like to get a feel just for like what people's experiences are and where people are at. So this will help me to kind of figure out what areas to focus on as I go through the presentation. This presentation is going to be very conversational. So feel free to jump in with some feedback and post your questions in the chat as we go through. Mr. Katz is going to be monitoring that for me, and he'll read those out as they come up, and yeah, we'll just kind of go from there as long as the rabbit holes aren't too terribly deep. Then feel free to ask whatever you'd like. Okay. All right, cool. So a lot of people have created multiple awesome, great. I've used some PowerApps. Okay, cool. So we've got a pretty wide variety of usage out there. That's great. I've got one more question for you guys, and that is about components. I'm really interested in whether or not people have ever used components in their PowerApps before, because I am going to lightly touch on some components, and actually the specific component that I'm going to talk about today, if you haven't used components, this would be an excellent first component. So if you've never used components, this is going to be fantastic because it's super simple. Wow, split pretty much right down the middle on that one. Oh, nope. Now we're closer to no. Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, so let's dive in. So PowerApps styling, what are we really talking about? So what we're going for here is basically the ability to give a quick, consistent look and feel to our PowerApps and be able to for example, the primary goal that I was going for with a lot of this is to be able to change a color without having to touch every single freaking control that's on the Power App. For those of you that have built a few of these, you understand exactly what I'm talking about, and it can be an absolute nightmare. I also want to start out by saying the methods that I'm describing today are just that. It's a method. It is not necessarily the best method. It's definitely not the only method. I actually have a slide towards the end here that I'm going to show you guys that has references to other people's methods, and I will discuss that at the time as to some of the pros and cons of some of those methodologies, but I'll provide for you the resources so that you can check those out on your own. So yeah, there are some things in here, and unfortunately there are also some drawbacks to the methodology that I will be showing you, and I will be going over those as well. So diving into it, a little bit of jargon to get out of the way. The first two are actually commands within PowerApps. So there's the self command, which should be used a lot, and some of the controls that you find come in actually take advantage of this command, but not all of them. So a great example of this, my biggest one that I use this for a lot, is icons. Whenever I introduce an icon, I almost always want that icon to be perfectly square. And I can't stand the fact that every time I want to resize it, I have to go adjust the height and then independently adjust the width. So what I like to do is I'll go into the width and I'll just set the width to self.height. And what that means is anytime I adjust the height, the width is automatically changed to the same exact value. So it's a wonderful thing, saves a ton of time, and this is also a great technique for keeping things responsive. Doing things to self is very good for responsiveness. One of the other things you can do, it doesn't have to be independent as well. It doesn't have to be a one-for-one match. So you could do formulas like the width could be self.height times 1.5 if you wanted to maintain a certain ratio of a rectangle. You know, if I always wanted the width to be 50% larger than the height, then you can write a formula for that. And you can set that up where it always maintains that aspect ratio, but it does so based on you only changing one value, which can be, again, super, super helpful when you're building something out. Another thing that I wanted to talk about, I am not a graphic designer, okay? I don't do any graphics. Anytime I'm doing graphics, and here's the conundrum there. I'm a huge advocate of using graphics within not only your Power Apps, but also all of your SharePoint sites. I see too many people who just never assign a thumbnail to their SharePoint sites, and they just go with the default, like the initials that Microsoft automatically generates there. You know, if you name a site something like Data Core, for example, Microsoft will just put in a little DC in a circle by default to represent that. And even that's relatively new. They used to just have a SharePoint logo for absolutely everything. So at least they started doing that. But even still, a single little icon to go up there really, really helps. Especially for the larger environments. Like I know a lot of the people on this call work for very large enterprises that have multiple subdivisions and a lot of people doing kind of shadow IT sort of stuff within each of those subdivisions. This stuff gets really chaotic. So if you can create visual continuity between these things via either graphics or color codes or things like that, it's super, super helpful. So I do strongly believe in that, but then the conundrum with that is, again, not an artistic bone in my body. So that's where I'm kind of stuck with. And a quick pro tip, actually, I'll show you one of the things that I do for that is in Microsoft Word now has these beautiful icons that we can use. This is a very cool feature. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but in Word, you can go to Insert and select an icon. And there's a relatively large library, and it usually shows me all of that library. There we go. So if I do a quick search for people, here's all these wonderful people. So there's lots and lots of people, lots of different poses, all kinds of wonderfulness. And the great thing about this is once you insert one of these, let me scroll down and show you some of these others that I've actually made for clients and the like. So here's some that I've made for some client sites. And again, not a graphical bone in my body, but just by pulling these icons from one single library, you can develop at least a consistent look and feel. And if we go down here, I started to figure out, if I'm more consistent about the colors and the outlines. So there's actually an outline and a fill for each of these. And just by using some of the company colors, then you can create kind of a consistent look and feel for company logos. So here's a bunch of logos that I put together for some of these clients. Okay. So, and these ones, for example, I put these in place for an app that I was doing that needed user profiles. I had user profile pictures, but I wanted a placeholder for if their photo wasn't available. So I use these images as placeholders if their photo is not available, not the snowman so much. What else do we have in here? Lots and lots of stuff. And here's all of them in Wellington Street Consulting colors. And there's a list of images that I needed to make for. So anyways, the point being, you can use this, create an icon, and then you can just right click on it and save as picture. Boom. So right from within Word, I can save that as a picture and then pop that right into SharePoint and say, hey, use this. Or I can upload it to PowerPoint and say, use this. So it's a wonderful way to get some really good graphics in there. Quick and easy. When you do this, by the way, this also saves as vectors. So it can be, they're all highly scalable. You can also mix and match these components. Like if I go up to Like this one here, I took this picture of this head and I've been experimenting with overlapping. Yes, here you go. So you could take other images and kind of overlay them on top of them. So I used this for an icon for one of my sites, and then I added a gear to it for the admin panel of that same application. You know, so that way we're creating consistency across our icons. Super helpful. Again, not a graphical bone in my body, and I don't have to sketch any of this, and that makes me happy. Likewise, there's a command in PowerApps called color fade. This is one of my absolute favorite commands in PowerApps because it can make it look like you know what you're doing from a color standpoint without doing any work whatsoever. So if you can pick at least one color, you can then relate other colors to that just by fading it out to varying levels. Okay, so for example, one of my clients, their core color is a neon green, so I have that bright green as their primary color, but then I have a for a background that they use for selected items, I have that same color, but it's faded out to like 90%. So it's really just a faint green. It's almost like a green haze. And we'll see that later on. But the way that I was able to do that is just by taking the code, the same exact color, and referencing it and saying, let's just take that color and fade it out. So we have a variation of that same color. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about, since some people have never used components, I just want to touch on this real quick. Components are basically a way in PowerApps to group a bunch of controls together and create a custom input or output for that group of controls. What's really, really important to understand about components is, first off, if you save the component in a component library, then you can not only use it multiple times within a single app, but you can use it multiple times across multiple apps within your entire environment. Okay, so if you have like for example, one of my clients is a mortgage broker. So we may build a mortgage calculator that does some like advanced functionalities for calculating compounding interest, which, by the way, if you've ever tried to do that in Excel, it's a freaking nightmare. So believe me, once you figure out the formula for doing that, you don't want to have to do it over and over again. So we're thinking about building an interest calculator in a component, and then once we have that in a component, we can add it in any app we want across the entire environment, which is the click of a few buttons. The other important thing to know is once you have turned something into a component, from a performance standpoint, PowerApps will see that entire component, no matter how many controls are within that component, it sees it as one control. This is a huge benefit from a performance standpoint. Your apps will load faster the more components you use within reason. You know, that doesn't mean take everything you do and turn it into a component just to do that. That would be silly. But there are big advantages to doing that as well. That's the wrong slide, and we're going to go into demos. Sessions expired while we were doing this, so let's go down here. Okay, so one of the things I would highly recommend people to do is to also create a template screen within your applications. This is the wrong app. In 1 second, that is the wrong app. I knew it shouldn't have been expired because I was just working in it. And now this is going to do that fun thing. There it is. That's the right one. Yep, WC template. So if I go down here, you'll see this is a screen that I just call screen temp. This is a template screen that I have in my template PowerApps. So this is the Wellington Street Consulting route template. So anytime, why? The demo gods have frowned upon me. I'm sorry. So anytime you have something, and I think, Rachel, this will help a lot with what you and I were talking about before the session started. Templates are a great way to kind of establish a look and feel from the get-go and get started with your stuff. Okay. This template also has components, so the header is a component and the footer is also a component. I'm not going to go too deep on these particular components. These are more advanced. Well, the header is more advanced. There's not really anything to the footer. We'll look at the footer. So the only thing that the footer is doing is it basically just gives us the ability to display the app version. So if I go in here, I can put my 1.0 right there, and boom, now I have version locked right into the footer right there. And if I click on the footer, you'll notice that even though this footer consists of multiple labels and a color bar and all of that, when I click on this, I don't have the ability to change all of that. I just have these few custom properties. These are the properties that I set up in the component that I wanted to pull forward. So when we play with these properties, it automatically will change whatever I wanted it to change within the component. So the other great thing about components is you can set them up to do really advanced things that your users don't need to know about. They don't need to understand all of the crazy programming that you put into it to make it do that. You know, so again, you know, the mortgage calculator is a great example of that. You know, lots of crazy code for that. I also have a tabbed interface that I reuse over and over again, and that is also super helpful. Excuse me, let me turn off my nightlight. So what I do is, instead of creating a new app by going into PowerApps and saying new app, we always have somebody create an app by opening the template and then just going to File and Save As. Okay, so by going to File and Save As, they automatically get these screens. And I've already laid out these screens for style and theme and a home screen and this template. And then if they want to create new screens, we create new screens just by duplicating the template screen. And then we can give that a new name. So I'm going to take my screen temp 1 and call it dev. Actually, I'm going to call this one demo. Okay. And by doing that, it's already copied. So it's already got all of my header information. Everything's great. It's got all of my layouts. All of my containers are configured exactly the way that I want. None of them step over the header or the footer. And all I have to do to update my header is if I go over here, I can now change this to demo. And that puts the demo text right up here. So this is also a perfect example of the background color stuff. Oh, okay, so it's actually already set. But if we look at the text color for this is actually set up as a color fade of the background color. So this component is set up by default where it gives you two colors, but basically you don't have to assign values to both of those colors. Okay, so check this out. If I go to this background color, all right, and I just change this to red, the text color is now a faded red. Okay, so by changing one thing, it's changing multiple properties. Okay, this is one of the key concepts of doing this sort of stuff. And the same thing goes for the footer. Is I can click on the background, I can change this to red. Oh, it doesn't like it. It is case sensitive, and the text is now a faded variant of it. Now, the fade, I believe, is a different percentage. Yeah, it's 45% for the footer, and on the header, it's 80%. So, and that's intentional. I wanted the footer to be more subtle. But those values were set just as the default values in there. If I wanted to, I can override this right here, and I can say, you know what? I want this to be really nice and loud. Let's just make it bright white. And boom, now it's white. So using components is also a great way to kind of enforce the styles and things like that. If you set up, whenever you build a component, you have the ability to present these attributes for people to change, but you can set what the default values are for those attributes, for those properties. And you know, as we all know, most people are lazy by nature, so they won't change them if they don't have to. And if you really wanted to get nasty about it, you can just hard code in those things and not present the colors as an option here. So you could just say, add this header is always this color. You know, you could also do enforcement by agency or purpose or something like that. Maybe you've developed color codes for different options in there. So that's just to give you guys some ideas. Any questions on any of that so far? And again, feel free to put your questions right in the chat as we go along. All right. So the next thing that I really wanted to jump into here.
There was a quick question on creating a component.
Oh, yeah. Good call. So So when you create a component, if you go right over here, if you're looking at the tree view in PowerApps, you have in the tree view, you have screens and you have components. Okay. And you'll see where I was starting to mess around with a menu view in here. And I've actually decided that that's not where that should go. So that's not where that goes. So you can actually just click on new component right here. And you can just start piecing things together right within that. So you can do that. That is called a local component if you do it that way. So a component that is created in this way can be reused, but only within this one particular app. Okay, so this would be useful for maybe like headers or footers across a single app, something like that. I don't actually recommend using this anymore because there's very few use cases where you're going to bother creating a component that couldn't also be useful within other apps. So in order to share them across apps, you can go to a component library. So if you're looking at your PowerApps main view under apps, same place where you have all of your apps listed, we also have a subsection right here called component libraries. And within your component libraries, you can set up multiple libraries.
Would this be a good place to set it up if you had multiple divisions? Each division would have its own color. So division A would have its own library. Division B would have its own library.
Yeah, that would be a good way to do it. You could either do it that way, or you could divide it up by what the components are, and then within each one have a variation for each division. Either way. I was actually mapping this out because, again, this is a relatively new feature. I mean, it's actually been out for over a year, but Microsoft still has a preview tag on this. That said, it is very stable, and it's definitely something that they are moving forward with. So I'm very confident in recommending people to use it. So yeah, so if I look at this particular library, actually that's going to bark at me because I already have that open, right? Nope, I don't have that one open. I have the other one open. Okay. So this is my style library, and this is actually the very first component I wanted to talk about. So I've created a component called color palette. All right, and this component is really nothing more than I have a container in here, and within that container, I have a list or a label. I have a label and a rectangle for each and every color that I wanted. All right, so super simple. I made a rectangle, I made a label, and then at the root level, at the component level, this is where you can add custom properties. So when I added a custom property, I would give it a name. We'll call this extra. And then I can give it a description. And I can choose whether it's an input or an output. For the most part, most of the things that you're going to be doing are inputs. So inputs are what always basically give people the ability to configure your component. So all of these colors are inputs. And then down here for the data type, you can just select color and then create. And now we have a new thing up here. And by default, it set the color to black and it input RGBA code for black. Okay, so once you've done that, you simply go back to, so say my primary block. If I look at this primary block, and we look at the color for this primary block, I set it to the name. So the name of this, I called it PLT. And then dot primary, because primary is the name of the attribute that I created. So over here, that references this value right here. All right, does that make sense to everybody? Anybody have any other questions about components? So that's pretty much all I was going to say about components. Like I said, this is a great first component because it's super simple. This is all there is to it. You know, the honest to God, the fanciest and most time-consuming thing I did on this was figuring out the code for this HTML gradient that I put behind it. So I put this gradient behind it that fades from white to black. And I basically did that because without that, I noticed that I was losing my blocks that were either black or white. They would just kind of merge into the background. So I was trying to figure out what I could do for a background that would make any color show up no matter what it was. So that's what I did. And that's just a bunch of goofy CSS. But, and again, this was also completely optional. You don't have to do this. This was just me showing off and being bored, you know. Once I get an idea in my head, I'm like, ooh, that would look cool. So it's totally worth spending an hour on. All right, moving on. Oh, good, this one loaded up. So this other library that I have is all the headers and footers and fun stuff like that. So this is where those live. Oh, you know what? I take that back. This right here, my spacer, this is the absolute easiest component you will ever make. And I highly recommend everyone make one of these. This is why I made this. I made this because I was sick and tired of every time I put in like just a random rectangle to work as a spacer between some objects in PowerApps to get things to line up. Everything would look beautiful right up until somebody moused over it. And if they mouse over this invisible section, it turned bright blue because the damn on hover color is set differently by default. So, and not only will it turn bright blue, but also I believe by default, when it goes to on hover, it turns on the border, and the border has a width of like 2 pixels, which means it also fluctuates in size when you hover over it, which means that your spacer that you put in there to align everything is now throwing everything out of alignment. And it just gives you these really goofy effects of when you move the mouse around, shit will like phase in and out a little bit and just kind of shift around and look really goofy. So I took a rectangle and I just turned off all of the on hovers. I set the on hover to self fill, all that fun stuff. You know, and that's literally all I did. I just slapped like this whole thing. If you look at it, it's just one rectangle. And I slapped it in there, and it's got its color is set to the space color fill. So I set that up as an attribute. So I have 3 attributes for it. One for the spacer height, one for the spacer width, and one for the spacer fill. And again, I'm pretty sure the width, oh no, I statically mapped these to 100 by 100. That's right. Yeah. So these I didn't tie to each other, but you could tie them to each other if you wanted to. I just set it to 100 by 100, and then I update it to whatever I need my space to be, and then I can just stick it in there. I set it to black by default because I wanted it colored when I add it in so I can see it as I'm moving it around. Sometimes while I'm working on stuff, if I'm getting really confused, I'll turn it to like a neon green, and I'll turn different spacers into different shades of neon until I get the spacing all right, and then I just turn them all to transparent. Once everything's lined up right, just set it all to transparent, life is good. Okay, but if we go over here, we type in something like color, and we spell color without an X. Then you will see, oh, right, because everything's under fill. There you go. So this is what we did. Press, oh, right, if you click on it, it's a different color too. If you hover over it, it's one color. If you press on it, it's a different color. If it's disabled, it's a different color. So all I did is I used that self command that we were talking about and pointed it all to this one fill. Okay, so all of these reference this fill, and then this fill references the custom property that I added for this component. So now updating one color in one location changes all 4 of these attributes. Any questions about any of that?
Just about what that infinity stone component is.
Yeah, so the infinity stone, it does not work, so I'm not ready to talk about it. It's an experiment, and I can't get it to work. And actually, it's ironic that you're asking me about that, Mike, because you and I were talking about that. It's supposed to be a dynamic gallery, a dynamic item that goes inside a gallery, and there's lots and lots of very complicated coding around that one. That is the antithesis of what you should do for your first component. So anywho's, that's it for components. Does anybody have any other questions about that?
With these components, you have your library, and when you use them in the apps, and you make a change in the library, the component library to that one, will that roll out to all the components that are out there if they haven't been modified?
Sort of. So not automatically. What will happen in that case is the next time you edit a Power App that has a component in it that has been updated, you will get a little banner across the top of your app that says components have been updated. Click here to review. Okay. And by the way, when you click there to review, the only thing that it will let you review is whatever you put in the version comments when you updated the library. That's the only thing you'll see. So make sure that your version comments are relevant and informative, or just tell everybody to ignore it and just click OK all the time. But know that there's nothing dynamic about what it tells you is visible. And also, so essentially the answer to that question is no, it doesn't automatically get out there. So you can't just publish a change in the library and then that'll just automatically update all of your apps. Now, I suspect that as Microsoft matures this project, there might be a way to click an extra button after you publish your changes. There might be a second step that says deploy changes to all apps that maybe will force that out. But then again, I could see them not doing that because that would potentially break apps. Depending on what those changes are, that might break it.
That was going to be my next question regarding that, is if that's going to push, if you do push it out and a user accepts it and you haven't updated your notes on what those changes are, and you allow the users to make changes to those components, whatever they've done is just probably going to get overwritten.
So one of the big advantages here, well, wait a second.
If they accept the changes.
Okay, so if they accept the changes, any inputs that they configured are not changed.
Okay.
Okay. Those are only changed if you actually, if part of the change to the component was to change the properties, then a new property will appear. The only thing I could see as problematic is if you actually removed a property that was in use. Then, I mean, that could be problematic. Depends on what that property was, what it was doing, you know. So those sorts of things do need to be thought out very carefully when you make those updates. You definitely need to think about how those things work. And yeah, you definitely want to be very intentional about the changes that you make and how you're making them. All right. So that said, I want to hop back into regular old PowerApps here and get into what led me down the road to making this craziness. All right, so I'm just going to go to my insert button and I'm going to insert a button. Yay, there we go. Classic default PowerApps button. I'm going to center it just for cool effect. All right. So one of the very first things that I do with a control that I have to put in here is I like to simplify it. In my opinion, it's wonderful that Microsoft gave us all of these little variations for this. But honest to God, there's too much. And I think one of the things that they did kind of badly is they made too many static references. I wish a lot of their references referenced other properties. So using the self command more. Okay. A quick pro tip that you'll notice, by the way, is I have a tendency when I use PowerApps, I don't use this menu for changing my control properties very much. The only time you'll see me using this menu is if I'm doing like really big complicated formulas in there, like submit buttons and, you know, like on select sort of stuff. For the smaller, super simple properties, I like to go over here. If you go to the control, okay, it defaults to this property tab. But if you click on the advanced tab, you've got a search for properties right here. I find this far more helpful, especially when doing styling and colors. Okay, and I'll give you a perfect example of where this is useful is right here. When I type in the word color, unlike here where it will only show me one thing and it'll only show me the thing that starts with the word color, here shows me every single property that has the word color in it. All right. Now, this is a default out-of-the-box button from Microsoft, okay? I have made no changes to this. I just went insert and clicked on add a button. So you'll notice here that there's a static input for the color of white. So this color refers to the color of the text. They're doing a fade on the self-fill for the border, but the disabled border color has a static entry to it and all kinds of craziness. What I look for is anytime they have statically entered the same color multiple times. Okay, so I'm going to look for anywhere else where they put in white, and I'm just going to say self over to color. Okay, so here we go. The hover color is the same as that. So I'm just going to go here and type the word self. Okay, and when I'm typing over here, you still do get the autocomplete functionality. So I can do self dot color. And the other nice thing about this is it should auto suggest things that reference only properties of that same type. So for when you're trying to put in for the color fields, it should show all of the other fields that have a color value in them first. Okay, so now we only have one of those. Let's look at the disabled color. So disabled color we have statically set here, but this disabled border color is the same as that. So I'm going to take that and set that to self dot disabled color. Boom. Okay. And they're doing a fade off the fill over there. That's fine. So then the other thing I want to look at is all of the fills that are in here. Okay, so this is our blue. So they have a disabled fill that is different. But that looks like a completely unique color. We haven't seen that color anywhere else. So I'm actually going to leave that. Why are they fading this? That's interesting. Oh, that's the fill of that. Yeah, so right there. I don't know why this is set this way. I think this is ridiculous. So instead of this being this same color right there, so you see, this is what would drive you crazy. If you were to update this fill color by itself, the hover fill, yeah, because I've run into this. You update the fill color, so it's all nice and pretty, right until you mouse over it. And then when you mouse over it, it turns to blue again. Why? I made that button red, but when you hover over it, it turns blue. Why? And the reason why is because it's statically set here instead of using that self command. So if I just change this, instead of using this RGBA value, I'm going to say self dot fill. And now, anytime I update this fill, it's automatically going to do that same color at minus 20%. So it won't look totally wacky. Okay, so this is a great way to really simplify the updating of all of your stuff. Okay, I'll give you another example that I also think is a little silly. If I type in radius to see all of the radiuses, let me ask you guys, how often are you changing the radius on one corner of a button? Only one. I want the radius on this corner to be 25, but I want all the other corners to be 5. Why? I don't think people are doing that often. So I like taking the radiuses and setting those to self. And then I can just copy that. And I'm going to set that to the same. And now, so we see how my button looks there. Now if I go here and I update my radius and I say make it 25, I turn that off. There you go. Now I've got a pill. So I only had to update one radius and I get the same thing. I also like to do the same thing with padding and fills, you know, well, not fills, we already talked about that, but you get the idea. My main point is self is not just for colors. You can use the self command to match anything to any other property as long as it's the same property type. So colors for colors, numbers for numbers, things like that. Yes, there are some use cases for having different radiuses. That is correct. For example, tabs. I create tabbed interfaces. And the way that I create my tabbed interfaces is I actually use buttons. And a tab is really just a button with radiuses on the top corners, but squares on the bottom. So I just set my bottom edges to that. But that said, how often are you doing that in comparison to wanting them all the same? Typically, you're wanting them all the same all the time, you know? And again, this isn't permanent, right? You can undo this at any time. Okay, I'm doing this based on how often you're doing each of these sorts of commands. You know, if you wanted to create all of the buttons for your app in the way that Mike has demonstrated there in his picture in the chat, you can do that. And you can even set it up so that each corner is tied to each other, so you can play with them independently, but at least you're only adjusting 2 corners instead of 4 if you wanted them tied that way. Okay, but the idea would be create one of these and then you do what I'm going to do next, which is now that I've done all of that, we can take this button and copy and paste and paste again. Okay, and that looks goofy, so I'm going to space it out real quick. Boink, 10, boom. Let's make it more. Okay, so that's the first thing that I like to do. Okay. I call that, I used to call those self-centered controls because I just used the self command all over. I now use in the, in my naming conventions, I actually refer to them as meglos for megalomaniacs. But that's just me, I'm silly, and I like doing things in my naming conventions that are easily distinguishable from other components. So there's nothing else out there, or very few things that start with MEL. So I can type in MEL, they come right up. It's super quick. So That's another pro tip I'll give you guys is in your naming conventions. First off, use naming conventions. Second off, use naming conventions that use rare letter combinations and use them and by rare letter combinations, I mean things that are more likely to be unique and specifically things that are different from a lot of the Microsoft presets. Okay, so for example, I refer to my color palette as a color palette, and I use PLT to reference that. I specifically avoid the word theme because Microsoft has a thing in here called themes. And if you type in theme, you get all kinds of goofiness that has to do with the native themes that are in PowerApps, which I don't use any of those controls, but I don't want any of them popping up when I'm typing in a few letters. So similarly, I use containers all the time. I do not abbreviate my containers with CON because there's so many things in PowerApps that start with CON or COM. I actually go way out there on containers and I refer to them as buckets, which I abbreviate BKT. So it doesn't have to make sense to anybody else. It's my naming convention. It only has to make sense to me and my employees. That's you. So as long as we're on the same page about that, it's all good, right? Now, for those of you that are working for a larger company, I highly recommend publishing as a part of your style guide, include naming conventions for all of your components. You know, yes, it's going to be nearly impossible to enforce. I totally understand that, but you can't even come close to enforcing it if you never give the option of telling them. So that makes it impossible to enforce. Excuse you. So can you guys hang on 1 second? Does anybody have any questions while I hang on 1 second? Nothing? Nobody's got any questions? I covered everything perfectly. Everybody understands everything there is to know about this stuff. That's great. Okay.
A little pro tip, you might want to maybe talk about the justify and alignment of the items inside a component. The setter.
Oh, you mean inside a container?
Yeah, I'm in a container. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So that's almost a whole other topic in and of itself. I'll go over it real quick. Containers are awesome. I highly recommend using them. One of the things that they do really well is they provide alignment features to any component that you put inside the container. So right here, we're looking at a container and I can change, if you watch these buttons, as I click around on this, I can change the orientation of these buttons all over the place. And I can even make them span all the way across and put them span across and then put them in the middle. And you can just do wonderful things with them just by putting stuff in a container. And there's so much more that containers can do too, but I can't get into it too much. It could literally be a whole other a whole other topic. But yeah, I do recommend using containers. And by the way, if you use these new screens, the screen templates, this is the screen template that I start with. And Microsoft puts in containers. All of these sections that you see in all of these templates, these ones that are sectioned out, they're doing that using containers. Okay, so I use this one and then I add more containers to it. So my default one is basically this, and then I add 3 more containers within this container with a vertical orientation. So this container is horizontal, and then I have a vertical container inside that. And you'll even see deeper nesting of containers as we move forward. So, all right. So we showed how we can create these self-centered controls. Okay, now that I have this guy self-centered, when I click on his color, I can go up here. I can actually just update the color right from here. And let's give it a nice deep red to match the red that we have there. And because of that, I'm now going to hold down the button. And now when I hover over it, it turns a slightly deeper shade of red. Okay. So we don't get that vibrant blue. All right. I'm actually going to add another one just to give you guys an idea of what I'm talking about. Okay. So I'm going to take this last one. This is the more square button because I haven't messed with that. And if I change this to that same deep red, okay, I'm now holding down my play button. When I click on this, it looks like that. When I click on, look at this, when I mouse over it, it still turns blue. And when I mouse over, look, the border is still red. Turns blue, but the borders, it's just goofy. It's crazy. But this one, much more coherent. When I click on it, it just inverts the colors. So the text becomes fill and fill becomes text. Or fill becomes color and color becomes fill. So, yeah. So that's why we do that. Now, one of the other things that we can do, taking this to the next level, is we can tie this button to that button. So if I take this button and I want to update its color, hang on a second, what's this button's name? I need to know this button's name. It's button 1. That's a good name. So what I'm going to do now is instead of that, I'm going to click on color. And instead of setting this manually, I'm going to set it to button 1 dot fill. Whoops. And I did that on color. So I should change this to button 1 dot color. But that doesn't do what I wanted because I wanted to update the fill, which is rest color. Oh, right. Yeah. So when you click on color here, see, it doesn't come up. This is the other reason that this menu drives me crazy. So I just use this advanced all the time now. And I'll just type in fill. And there we go. So I'm going to tie this to button 1 dot fill. Boom. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing down here. Fill. And I'm going to change this to one dot fill. Boom. Okay. So now we have 3 buttons that are all the same exact color, right? That's great. Who cares, Mike? Anybody can do that, right? But here's the magic of this one, right? Is now, if I go to button 1, and I want to update this color, say make it green, look at that. The second I type the word green, all 3 of these now change to green. Okay, so I now have a master button and then what I refer to as styled buttons. So these styled buttons are all tied to the master button. All right, so let's jump ahead and let me show you how that becomes really crazy. Okay, so if we look over here, let me get rid of that first, clean up my screen. So I create a page, a screen on my templates called style. All right, so all of my templates now have a style page. And what I do with that page, I create a section here for all of the meglos, okay? All of my meglos are basically just me updating changes that I feel should have been right out of the box altogether, okay? The other thing that I do with all of my meglos is I also implement my my naming convention. That way, when I grab one of these buttons and I copy it over, it already starts with my naming convention. Okay, so we've kind of fixed 2 problems already just by doing this. Okay, we've created less attributes that we have to update in order to make our changes more consistent, and we've implemented a need or a naming convention in an easy way. Okay, people don't have to think about the naming convention now; it's just there. Okay, the only thing that they have to know to do differently is to come to the style page and copy the inputs off of there and paste them in rather than using the toolbar across the top. Okay, that's how we get them to do that. All right, over here are all of my styled components. Okay, and what I mean by styled is I basically took my meglos and I paste them over here, and then I start applying my colors to them. All right, and then for a secondary twist, instead of just applying the colors, you notice that I added my color palette to this screen. All right, and again, when I click on my color palette, you can see it's named PLT, okay? I always rename it, even if you name it PLT. Unfortunately, whenever you add a component, Microsoft adds like an _1 to it or some goofiness like that. It gets really crazy. I just rename it back to PLT, okay? And the reason for that is it makes it super, super clean and easy to read in all of your components moving forward, on all of your controls. Okay, so in here, I have all of my colors. Okay, here's the one I was talking about before. My selected one is just a variation. Okay, I hard coded it here, but this is the same as primary set at 76%. So that's primary faded towards white at 76%. By the way, this fade works as both, you can fade things either towards white or towards darkness, towards black. Okay, so if you simply put a negative value in there, then it'll fade it towards black. If it's a positive value, it fades towards white. Okay, and you can represent that as either a decimal point or as a percentage. Both are interpreted exactly the same by Microsoft. Okay, so if we hop in here real quick, right? If we look at this little icon here, we will see this is kind of the compound of everything, right? If we look at the padding, for example, you'll see that the padding is grayed out for 3 of the 4 paddings, okay? And that's because we keyed the padding so that, whoa, 44 is a lot. So as soon as I tab out of there, it sets all 4 to the same value that I put in there, okay? So now that's padded in all directions by 4. And I can change it back just by hitting 0. And as soon as I tab out, it updates all of the ones that are referencing that. Okay, same thing with the width. The width is locked to the height. So if I go to this height and I change that to 32, you'll notice the whole thing shrunk, but it stayed a perfect square. All right. But most importantly, if we look at the colors in here, you'll see that all of the colors don't reference actual colors. They reference the color palette and then the name of one of the colors on the color palette. Okay, so when I use this method, there's literally no color codes anywhere within the whole thing except in the color palette. So the color palette is the only place where my colors exist. Okay, and that gives me this awesome capability of when I go to the color palette and I want to update a single color, like say this guy, and I update him to red, look at everything that just changed on this screen. So anything that was tied to that primary color just updated across my entire app by changing one color. If I want to change that secondary to something that maybe kind of complements that red, we'll say maybe this red here. It's kind of closer to the, no, come on. There you go. Then that updates that one. And then, yeah, see, my BG selected was not mapped to that. So I'm actually going to update this. And instead of doing this way, I'm going to tie this to the primary and fade it 76%. So we're going to say color fade palette PAT dot primary. Another pro tip, because I'm constantly referencing these things and I hate worrying about the case sensitivity, I always name my color palette in all lowercase. So it's PLT and it's all lowercase, and that's just less keystrokes as I'm doing all of this. And those little keystrokes, man, they add up. So I'm going to do that. And then we're going to fade that. What did I have that set to? I think 76%. Boom. Done. So there we go. Now that's 76%. All right. Any questions? Any questions before I move on to the grand finale? The piece de resistance. All right. All right, here we go. Taking it to the stupid levels. You can also take this. Something's angry. Why is it angry? You can also take these and you can reference multiple color palettes. And you can, if for some reason you were so inclined, you could give people the ability to choose the theme that they wanted within the app itself. All right. So the way that I did this was actually relatively easy. Instead of referencing the palette itself, I just inserted a variable in between those. And these buttons, if you look at the button, so instead of saying palette, I'm setting the colors to VTM, which is variable theme. So all of my colors are set to VTM, and then I set my VTM variable to winter. If I click the winter button, or if I click the spring button, it sets my VTM to spring. So that's this palette. And if I set my reset to palette, it sets my VTM to PLT. So I can now jump around here. If I hold the right button, oh, it's already on spring. So I can go to winter or spring. Boom. Ta-da. And you can take the same concept and rinse and repeat as far as you want. You could have, 6 or 7 different themes. And I don't know why you would want to, but, when I was researching how other people were doing this, somebody added this in as a thing. They were doing their color palette as a table in a variable in the on start instead of as a component. But they were then showing how you could set that variable to another variable, and you can then toggle between multiple themes very quickly and easily. So that's it. Any questions? Questions, comments, confusions? All right. Everybody understood everything perfectly. I love it. Awesome. That's how I know I did it right. All right. So let's jump back in here. And we're going to talk about some of the drawbacks. I think, yeah, because we're not going to talk about metadata. That's silly. So drawbacks of this system. One of the problems is when Microsoft loads an app, it loads only the controls on the start screen when it first loads. So if you have things on the start screen that are referenced by things that aren't on the start screen, it slows down the performance. So essentially what happens is you kind of need your entire style screen to load in order for any of your colors or your color palette to trickle through. And that can also be problematic if you end up putting a lot of controls on there that you're not using. That can also slow things down. I mean, that's just general PowerApps best practices, is to use as few controls as possible. So that's really the biggest caveat here. And I have a couple of ideas on how you can maybe get around that. But honest to God, like, this is a theoretical issue. I've actually never run into this in the entire time that I've been using this methodology. I've never seen it really come up. And that's not to say that this isn't a best practice, because this is definitely not a best practice. Referencing things that aren't on your start screen is not best practice. But that said, I really think that the rewards are worth the caveats in this particular instance, because it's just such a massive time saver and helpful in every other way. I would also say that there are maybe some possibilities in putting the master controls in a way in which they're on that screen, but they're hidden, would be a way to do it. Or you can maybe, I'm wondering if there's maybe a way to actually load your style screen first and then just have it automatically change to a secondary start screen before the end user sees anything. There might be something to be said for something like that. I don't know. I haven't tested any of those, but those are some things that are on my roadmap to test out. One of the other drawbacks is forms. As some of you may have put together, if you use a SharePoint form is one of the biggest benefits of using a SharePoint form, or arguably the only benefit of using a SharePoint form, that it automatically adds all of these controls for you. Unfortunately, when it automatically adds all of those controls, it's adding all of the controls in their default state. There's no way to tell it to use controls that you have already configured. So that's problematic. I don't really have a good workaround for that, other than you'll find a lot of other people, and I do agree with this, a lot of other people will say, we really shouldn't be using forms because forms have lots of other issues as well. And then the last drawback that I would lay out is just that there's lots of upfront work. So as you can imagine, with all of this stuff, there's it's a lot of coding and a lot of time goes into building that. But I would say the counter to that is if you invest that time and then you just save it as a template and you use that template as your starting point for everything moving forward, then you're good to go. You only have to do that work once. Also, once you've saved that template, it's really easy to iterate off of that template. So you could take that template and then save it as and create another template with some variations for it. So maybe you have different like classes of applications, or maybe you have different departments that have different application templates that you want available. You can easily iterate off of that once you start with a template. So those are the drawbacks, and that's my response to my thoughts on those drawbacks. Okay. Other than that, I did say at the beginning, I wanted to mention other approaches. So there are lots of other ways that people are attacking styling. This is definitely not the only way to do it. Obviously, I personally think that it's one of the best, but everything has its pros and cons. There was a video that I found while researching for this. I alluded to this earlier. Somebody using the app on Start, and he creates a variable for his color palette up there. Really good stuff in there. Lots of similar stuff. He's the one who introduced to me the idea of creating multiples and having the live switch in between. So I 100% credit the PowerApps and Coffee channel for that. The other thing that I wanted to mention is this whole thing was done without any coding. So we never once touched VB Studio. And that was very intentional. I wanted to keep this very light. There are things that you can do by downloading the app and then peeling apart the raw code within within Studio. You can do that even in VS Studio Code. I don't know why I put VB. Wow, I'm thinking really old stuff. But anyways, there's another YouTuber out there, or a company called Bulb Digital. They did some amazing stuff with that sort of approach, where they actually they kind of do a lot of the styling and they set it to variables that don't exist yet. And they managed to set that where it shows up when you add a brand new app. So even if you're not doing the template, which is very cool, and really amazing, but much, much more involved. And the other disclaimer that I will give is just an echo of the disclaimer that they give as well, which is this is 100% not supported by Microsoft. So their technique for doing this, while it is very cool, and I hope Microsoft implements something like what they're doing down the road, it is not supported. So if you were to do that and then call Microsoft for any kind of help on that, they are going to run away screaming. The other thing is there is a thing called the Microsoft Power Platform Center of Excellence. I put a link down here at the very bottom for the Microsoft official documentation for the Center of Excellence, or COE. It's interesting, but very overly complicated, in my opinion. I have not had very good luck with it. But I would highly recommend, if you do want to get, it does have something called a theming generator that does centralized theming. April Dunham, who is a friend of the program and just wonderful all around great person to watch and follow, she did a great breakdown specifically on the COE theming generator. So I included a link for that as well. All right. And again, there are, I'm sure, hundreds of other people that are doing it in fun and interesting ways as well. These are the ones that really stood out to me. A lot of the others are kind of variations of these sorts of techniques. But if anybody out there has anything that they've seen, please feel free to put a link in the chat or mention something about that. Let us know. Very interested in learning more. All right. There's a breakdown of all of our demos. And that's it. This is me. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out. I am always available for questions and helping. And then my slide is going to restart for some reason. All right. So that's it. All right. Back to me, Mike. Anybody have any general questions? Similar to what you could do in Visual Basic, making new components by composition of previous components. Yeah, the more things change, the more they say the same. I completely agree with you, Paul. That is definitely correct. All right. All right. Well, if anybody else has any questions, I will be around for the cyber mingle after we close and stop the recording. So if anybody is being a little shy, then we can talk then. But until then, let's talk updates. So community stuff. Community. All right, so I'm putting back on my my Microsoft hosting or user group host hat. This is a list of all of the Microsoft events. These are all community calls. All of these are 100% free to join. I highly recommend these if you're new or even if you're experienced. I actually listened in on 2 of these this week. I actually missed the adaptive cards one, which I'm very upset about. I usually catch that one, but the dev community call was awesome, and the PowerApps was also fantastic. In the community call, they did those. That's where that screenshot came from that we were sharing earlier. This guy Andre Lage did amazing things with just some JSON code in list formatting. So yeah, check that out. If you go to this link, you'll find all of the updated information about these community calls. So feel free to check those out. For upcoming events, we have the Power BI Summit. That's coming up on March 11th. That's going to be online only, as most things are nowadays. And that's about it. We did have the Scottish Summit was coming up. That has actually been postponed, but they do not have a date as of yet. It'll be sometime in, I believe, June or July, but they haven't announced a specific new date as of right now. So we will keep you guys in touch on that. And that slide is in twice for some reason. And then we have other things that are run by the community. So these events are run by just members of the community. They are not official Microsoft events, which, you know, take that to mean whatever you wish. We've got the Women IT Pros, the Power Addicts, and the Power Hour. Power Addicts is also a great hashtag to follow on Twitter. There's lots of good stuff that's always coming out on their Twitter feed. So check that out. And then some of our sister groups. There's the Rhode Island SharePoint user group. They meet on the first Tuesday of every month. And they have an open call for speakers right now. There's also the Hartford Office 365 user group, which meets on the last Wednesday or Thursday of each month. And that's hosted by friend of the show, Jared Matfis. And the Granite State, we actually need to look into this. I'm not sure if the Granite State SPUG is still running or not. So this may or may not still be a thing. And then on even more rare occasions is on occasion there is the Boston Azure Meetup and the Power BI user group. All right. So this is the part of the meeting where we open up the forum to you guys. This can be about anything that you want to talk about, any problems that you guys have run into, any updates that you've seen. Does not need to be relevant or tied to our feature presentation this week. Just anything at all about Office 365. Anybody? Anybody? So fickle. I'd also like to take this opportunity to remind people there is a poll in the chat for what topics you'd like to see us review this upcoming year. So please let us know what you think. Be really interested in knowing where people's head is at on that stuff. I'm actually going to check results while you guys think about that. Ooh, Power Automate is in the lead right now. Fantastic. Man, I could talk about Power Automate for days. I mean, it's a tiny topic. All right. No tips or tricks, huh? All right. Well, once again, we wanted to thank Turn Digital for enabling us to do this, keeping the lights on. Wonderful company. Go show them some love over at Turn Digital. And also a quick thanks to all of our previous sponsors. We've got an awesome community around this user group. I've had lots of great companies show their support. We really appreciate that. Hey, that logo matches the one behind me. That's weird. I'm sure that's a coincidence. Make connections. We don't have a what are we doing next month slide. Okay, so our next month slide is missing, but I assure you we do have a presentation scheduled for next month. And we are, so we will be doing that on the third Thursday of the month, whatever that day that happens to be. And we will be doing that at 6 p.m. So that'll be on February 17th. We do have speakers lined up for the next 2 months, but after that we are open. So if anybody has any ideas for topics or any presentations that they would love to put out there, give us a holler. And that's about it. Until next month, we'll see you then. I'm actually going to stop the recording now, and then we can start with our mingle.